Okay. In this video, I continue on with the with trying to refine Rafaela. Something about her head felt wrong. I think later I decided it was her forehead was still too big. I never get these things. Well, I very rarely ever get these things right the first time. I kind of figure this is one of those things where it's like the more you practice, the better you get. The quicker you point out the flaws and issues that you baked into the design. And I've noticed that to some degree at least. I have noticed that I'm able to discover my problems and errors much faster than I used to. I guess it only gets better and better the more you do it. I've been drawing for quite a few years, but working digitally is something that I have not done as much. Well, I've done a fair bit. I guess everything I pretty much I've learned by looking up stuff online, but my drawing for me was always just like flipping over a class handout and then drawing on the back, the white space of school papers and things like that. And then I eventually got a sketchbook, and that's, I think, actually committing myself to drawing in my sketchbook is when things really began to take off for me. Because it was easier for me to think of the sketchbook as like, nothing in this is supposed to be perfect, right? Like, this is just all for your creatively aborted projects. People can flip through this, and if something's bad, right, it's like, well, it's a sketchbook. It's not going to be like, the birth of man or something like that. I knew some people who were kind of like that. I know, art is the sort of thing where it's like, if you're a perfectionist, then it's going to be extremely difficult for you to get better at. And I was definitely that. I didn't know I was a perfectionist, though. It was a concept that was just there and active, like it was pervasive in my own creative process, but I didn't realize it. When I had a point where I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna F it, we're doing it live. Actually, I did notice that there was an improvement when I would just kind of cut a project off and say like, okay, I'm done, rather than just sit there and tweaking and refining and tweaking and refining, especially when I didn't really have the intuitive skill set to try to get better at actually making improvements. This is the sort of thing where it's like, if you do have a mentor, you do have somebody who has more experience and awareness for these things, they can kind of help expedite that. But when it's just you on your own, there's this I heard it referred to as the parable of the pots, but it was basically this experiment where it was they had two groups of people, and one group, they said, okay, you're going to make these clay pots, and you want to make them as best as you can, make the best damn pots you can, right? And the second group, they were like, don't care about how good it is, just make pots. Make as many pots as you can. And I don't remember what the interval of time was. It was like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. But at the end of it, the group that was just blitzing as many pots out as they possibly could was the group that ended up improving the most within that interval of time. They ended up, the pots they started with were not very good, the pots they ended up with were a whole lot better. Versus the other group that was just trying to make each pot the masterpiece, the best possible masterpiece. They were spending way too much time trying to tweak and refine their pots, and they were just not getting as many produced as a consequence, right? But it also had the effect of making their progression slower. They weren't getting better faster. So it's after if you're a perfectionist, you're in group one, whether you intend to be or not. You're not group two. So the sketchbook inadvertently just kind of broke me of that. The more I just started drawing and sketching in my sketchbook and just realizing these are just dumb sketches. They're right. I had a lot of bad ones. I did notice that my drawing did improve, it visibly improved. Working digitally though, this is where it's gotten a little bit more complicated. I haven't actually started color for any of these characters, but that's still something I'm working on. If all you're used to doing is graphite on a blank sheet of paper, working with color then ends up becoming a whole new ball game. And so that's something I'm still getting better at. I'm forcing myself to do more practicing value. Practicing value is something I need to do, and practicing color. I do that some, just not as much as I want. I mentioned earlier in one of the other videos that I also write a lot. I enjoy writing a whole bunch, actually. It's easier for me to just sit down and flow with writing than it is with drawing. So I end up spending more time doing that. What I like doing is drawing the characters of the stories that I write. The characters, I write up their backgrounds. I don't sit down and do a whole bunch of pages of explicit writing for backgrounds, as much as I just kind of have ideas just kind of splat on a thought board. So the characters end up tying into the writing and the art. They so often tie together for me. I like having characters that possess features and qualities that I enjoy, just as far as abstractions go. But I also like them to be believable. When I sit down and try to do character deep dives, get into their psychology, it's I try to think okay, what is it? So we have Rafaela. She's a doctor and a vampire. Well, it makes sense to have access to like blood bags and things like that. People donate blood, and if you're a doctor vampire, you're probably going to have greater access to that than vampires that are not doctors. So this is within where it's like, okay, well, she's probably like, oh, I'm going to need to drink one of these blood bags, excuse me, right? Like, the people are probably not going to be very amicable to that. I don't know enough about, like, if you were a doctor, like, what kind of access would you have, and how would you have to, like, sneakily get, like, a blood bag from there to your house? I've never had to do this in real life. So thinking about, like, how a character actually would go through and do it, I do hit my ceiling eventually, but I do think, like, okay, in addition to having easier access to harmless forms of getting blood, getting sustenance, what else can we say about Rafaela? Well, she's not a mad scientist in the strictest sense, but she's the most believable, like, adjacent concept that you can get. When somebody comes in with an unusual, like, diagnosis, it's like a riddle for her to solve. She enjoys those sorts of, like, unusual medical conditions. She's like, oh, what has nature done this time, right? Like, she wouldn't necessarily state it that way while you're sitting there in her office, as much as she'd say the world's a little bit nutty, isn't it? Biology just sometimes does its own thing. Which it's, if you're a vampire, you're already like a supernatural bloodthirsting monster of the night. So she already knows that things can get a little strange, things can get a little nutty, more than you might appreciate. So when there's other oddities that occur in the world, she's endlessly curious about them. She understands that there's a degree of malleability to things, on a material scope and within a supernatural or spiritual scope as well. And it helps to be curious and constantly investigating things if you have endless amounts of time and therefore essentially endless amounts of attention. One of the things she's done is like, well, if I'm basically going to live forever, finding ways to just cultivate curiosity in the world is going to keep me sane, is going to keep me going, is going to keep moving forward. And so medicine was one of the things that she ended up moving into. The thought for the character is that, like, maybe in another 100 to 200 years after she's had to, like, filter through different aliases, she probably would end up going back to school and start investigating technology. This gets more into a science fiction territory, but it's like she is the sort of character who perhaps does end up becoming a mad scientist as biotechnology ends up advancing, right? We're kind of getting into the weeds of hypotheticals within hypotheticals at that point. And the story itself is not really intended to go into, like, vampires in space or nothing like that. Here, I started drawing another dude. This guy is Owen. You can see he's slowly coming together, and he does have, like, the square jaw. Yeah, like the chin, the cheekbones. He's very much, like the Simon Belmont or, He-Man, Conan the Barbarian sort of character. He's a big dude. I think in this video I do end up drawing his body. He's ripped, he's strong. He's definitely a Thor superhero type of build. So he's a big, strong dude. I do end up changing his body, though, at a certain point. Like, at first I was just drawing it straight on because I had, like, that was the reference, and I realized, like, I don't like this as much. So I ended up getting a different reference where it's like he's standing at a 3/4 view. And I don't think I'm still just working in the sketch for that one, but I don't think I like that one very much either. I'm probably going to have to go and start, like, looking up male model poses. Like, you can see with Lucas, I think, at this point, in the top right, he's, like, reclined. I didn't draw a shirt on him. I probably will go back, but, like, Lucas he's still, like, he's still super strong. Sexy dude mode, but he's not, like, ripped, he's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan the Barbarian, tough guy, like Owen is. Owen is, he's a different creature than Rafaela. Well, while Rafaela is often just, like, curious about, weird medical conditions for the sake of understanding the weird medical condition, Owen's background is much more rooted in statecraft inadvertently. I just got to the point in the story, actually, just a day or two ago, where his background was briefly referenced. He was born into a noble house. He doesn't really go into a lot of the details, and from a writing perspective, I don't want to get into a lot of the details. I want to give people an idea as to where it was located and what eventually happened to to it, right? But the sort of thing that gets lost to history because he is centuries old. But him specifically, he was a very proud, noble son, but he put a lot of emphasis on like self-mastery. So he didn't really drink to excess. He didn't go around, sleeping with women, even though he was like a noble son. There was ready access to that. He could have done it if he wanted. He didn't. He wasn't slothful. He didn't lay about. He didn't rely on other people to do things for him. He did it himself, because he thought, like the ideal person is, mastery of oneself, mind, body, and spirit. The thing is, he didn't have a very clear sense for what it meant to be master of one's spirit. So he prided himself a lot on his ability to, he wasn't given to his appetites. He didn't eat or drink to excess. He wasn't addicted to anything in particular, and if he felt himself maybe drifting in that direction, he disciplined himself against it, right? He didn't want to become that kind of person who was a slave to his appetites. And he largely succeeded, but his self-mastery cultivated a pride in him. He was a very arrogant and prideful person, and that ended up being his undoing. Pride comes before the fall is very, very much Owen's story. He encountered a vampire, and he didn't actually know that the guy was a vampire. He just thought he was like a silver-tongued charlatan, like a traveler, a drifter or something. And his pride was so incredible to this vampire. The vampire literally just put the challenge on him. He's like, okay, so you've mastered what it is to be a human. Clearly the mundane challenge of life, of humanity, is too small for you, so how about a supernatural burden? Maybe a supernatural burden is more to your liking. And so he went through the process of changing him into a vampire. And when Owen came to his senses, it was several days later, and it was nighttime, and he was out in the wilderness, but he could still see his home, his castle, and the town that was neighboring it. And there were fires, there was burning, and he was surrounded by the dead, the dying and the dead. And effectively what happened was he just went into a blood craze. He went mad. He killed his family. Then he killed the servants of his home. And then he descended upon the town, and the people fled and scattered, and he destroyed it. And he basically became a monster. And then it was sometime later, priests came to the town and they burned it to the ground. They just completely burned it. At first they thought Vikings attacked and killed everybody, but when the priests went and investigated, they determined that maybe something supernatural did happen here. Something much more horrendous occurred. So they consecrated the territory, burned it down. And the noble house disappeared to history. The name is gone. The territory was gone. It's basically one of the myths of the legends that has been eroded with time. Owen, after that experience of turning into a monster and killing the people he was sworn to protect, basically dedicated himself to a life of solitude, because he thought, if I'm such a horrendous monster and I am going to be a burden to all who live, the best thing I can do for them is exile myself and live in solitude. And that's what he did. So he was basically the promised heir, the great heir of a great house, and ended up becoming a monster that destroyed all of it. He encountered a degree of self-mastery that he could not attain until he met Claire. Claire is up there. She's the one with the cross necklace. I haven't fully worked out the details, but Claire puts a high emphasis on not harming people. As I've mentioned in the other video, that I do like the redeemed vampire archetype. The redeemed vampire archetype is one that, they have the superpowers, right? I do like vampires as villains, and there are bad vampires, but I also like, redemption stories, redemption characters, the redeemed clan. This is, I guess, about the point when I switched up Owen's body. I had it at the 3/4 view, because that's more interesting. While I'm trying this, I don't particularly like this pose more, and I haven't decided what kind of clothes I'd want to give to him. He does wear nice clothes, because even though now he is more in the redeemed territory, and he can tolerate the company and presence of human beings, he pushes himself to be around them and challenges himself, but he has to be very, very careful, because he doesn't want other people, essentially, if you're a vampire and you want to kill and drink people's blood, when you mess that up, other people are paying the price, right? They're paying the price very, very likely with their life. And for him, it's very, very important that if he messes up, he's the one who needs to deal with it. So this is a burden that's extremely difficult for him to navigate. He tries to be very, very more cautious than he would like, but more for the sake of people, more for the sake of the humans that he has once again sworn to protect. He's still suffers with his pride too. He's still kind of an arrogant douchebag, but he doesn't care. You know what I mean? It's the sort of thing, like, in real life I'm something of a coffee snob. I literally like roast my own coffee beans and grind them, you know, like I don't buy the stuff that's already pre-ground, but it's cheaper. It does require a bit more work, but you can kind of make it it's almost automated after a certain point, once you understand what to do. But I've had people basically say, like, yeah, you're a coffee snob, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, I am. I like coffee. I like good coffee, right? I'll drink suboptimal coffee, but I'm still, you know, it doesn't bother me that I'm a coffee snob. This is a territory I'm perfectly fine being a snob within, right? I'm perfectly happy being a snob. I like my good coffee, and I will not apologize for it. Owen is like that with regards to just being alive. Well, I guess unalive as far, no, that means something else too. Undead. He's perfectly fine with the perpetual pursuit of self-mastery, and now that he's undead, he has an eternity to do it. He wants to fulfill the role of still being the noble, the leader, the sworn to protect, you know, his lessers, right? Think of somebody who's born with straight 20s on their real life D&D character sheet. There are people out there like that. There aren't many of us, right? But there are going to be people then who are basically born with 8s and 6s on their character sheet, nothing above an 8, and it's unfortunate, right? They didn't choose that. It's just nature did it to them. Owen is like, yeah, that's unfortunate. That sucks, and it's also kind of annoying to have to be around. However, this poor person is not suited for statecraft, not suited for governance, not suited for probably even organizing the scope of their own life, let alone the lives of millions, as one would expect in a country. Someone like me, I'm the sort to do that, right? That's how he thinks about these things. He's like, who better than myself? He has a great amount of respect for Claire, because Claire was able to actually help him wrangle his appetite. And then she was like, you know, while it's good and noble to try to protect people from the monster that you cannot kill, the better thing would be to seek to control it, and there are ways to do it. We small steps, small conservative steps first, and then we can work at, you know, help build you into the man that you want to be. And that's essentially what his character growth and development has entailed as a consequence. So the family doesn't really engage in human affairs in very direct or overt ways. But Owen of the character, I mean, you know, political affairs. Rafaela, obviously, as a doctor, is engaging with people's health affairs as they come to her with their health problems. Owen is the sort who sees, like, the governance of the world powers at this point. He's accrued enough awareness to know that these things, there's an ebb and flow to power, there's an ebb and flow to institution, there's an ebb and flow to the myths and legends that validate whatever the governing body of the day happens to be. And as he steps back outside of modernity and sees the mind, like the logical framework of the modernist, and as he operates in democracy, he's left unimpressed just across the board. And if you think, obviously, he would agree with my politics, it's very likely that if this character were to sit down and explain his politics to you, you would find him to be an arrogant piece of shit, right? You wouldn't like him. He would tell you that you're wrong, and he would bluntly explain to you why you're wrong. And if you walked away from the interaction not liking him, that wouldn't burden him even in the slightest. He's not looking for your validation. He doesn't need it. He doesn't care, right? And he also would think, like, but that's, you know, in the same way, like a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old might call you an idiot or a doo-doo head or something. You're like, okay, well, that's a child, right? Like, someone hasn't governed their child well enough. He might think your insults against his person is like, you might be an adult, but you know, if you're acting like a child, it's a demonstration that you haven't learned to govern yourself well enough, which is yet even more reason for me to understand that could you possibly know about governing a country and its people, right? If this is if you yield so easily to in a disagreement. So he's a jerk, and he doesn't, as I don't care about being a coffee jerk, he doesn't care about being an actual jerk. So it's crawling into the psychology of somebody who is centuries old and lived in something of a monarchy situation or arrangement, governing arrangement. He's unimpressed with democracy. he would also say, like, you would want to pursue polity if you really cared about governance and statecraft. I think it was polity. Aristotle had a different term for it. He said democracy is the bad form of government, of rule by the many. Owen would have opinions about all of that, which I haven't fully fleshed out. It's part of like the psychology of the character, trying to understand the character. The other like Aiden is the other character in here that argues with him a lot. Mostly, they're both fairly arrogant and argumentative, and so they'll butt heads a bunch. You know, Owen is built like an Adonis. The picture I drew of Aiden, she is not really, I guess, whatever the female equivalent of an Adonis would be. She's a beautiful vampire chick. But I kind of thought maybe because she is given to, she's more prone to combat and sparring and violence, not, you know, wanton violence, just like if there's a need for violence, she's happy to meet it, right? I thought about maybe giving her a little bit more of a gymnast build to demonstrate that, like, she is physically capable. You know, with the vampire supernatural template, you can have a Barbie with a broadsword, right? It might be a chick who looks like a Calvin Klein model, but she could still lift a car and throw it at you. You know what I mean? You don't need the character to be super buff. Owen's super buff insofar as he was super buff in life. He trained with swords, axes, hammers, anything and everything, bow and arrow. It was part of his physical excellence, like building an excellent sense of self came with, you know, forging his body into what I'm attempting to sketch now. The character, well, maybe that pose is okay. I'm not sure. I haven't really decided yet. But he's probably going to have a button-down shirt with the top few buttons that are like unbuttoned. Maybe a really nice necklace and a really nice watch. Presentation is important to him. I mentioned in the other video, the family is wealthy because, you know, you make those investments 100, 200 years ago, and then it's just the time will make money for you. So they basically hit resource saturation. And Owen thinks, you know, if someday you are to be the monarch, you are to be, you know, the patroness or whatever of a territory, you need to inspire a degree of confidence in the people. And you can't just look like a drifter in a hoodie and sweatpants and flip-flops if that's what you're going to do. So he likes looking nice and good, but he also there's a practicality to it in his mind, which I guess I don't think of as wrong, but I'm not a guy like Owen. I'm not really looking to be king of anything, so if there's a crown in the gutter, I'm going to sell it on eBay. Right, I'm not going to put it on. Anyway, I'm happy to share more about these things moving forward. I do enjoy these characters. You know, if you have a suggestion, YouTube appropriate suggestion, I'm happy to hear it. Anyway, you all take care and have a lovely day.